Hello there, Ambrose Blofield back here again from the Sales Mastery Company. And today we are focusing on Alison Levine, and in particular, how to survive Mount Everest. Now, the lofty airs in and around running a business, and in particular, running a sales team, has a huge similarity between what it takes to succeed and summit and come down safely at Mount Everest, because you've got this rarefied air, you've got these constant pressures. And today I'm going to share with you in 10 to 15 minutes just ways to survive Mount Everest, and how do you apply that to leading a sales team, leading a business team, or leading yourself in a sales territory if you're responsible. Now, if you've downloaded the workbook already because you've been interacting with us with obviously social media recently in the build up to today's event, then congratulations. That way, please use the workbook and take some notes. I want to inspire you to take 3 actions from today of what are you going to do with the knowledge I share. If you haven't, please send us an email to admin@salesmasterycompany.com. Specifically request the workbook associated with Survive Mount Everest, and one of my team will get that copy through to you. On the second page, we've got a welcome note with a brief update of who we are. And there, the third note, let's talk about today. It's about developing your self-accountability. Some people refer to that somewhat correctly as self-leadership, but ultimately to make you understand what do you need to do as an individual, either as a manager, as an owner, or as a salesperson, to take the lead, to apply it into your sales role from what mountaineers and explorers do around the world. Ultimately, to succeed in the world of mountaineering and also in the world of sales, you've got to rely on yourself. Now, I'm not saying you can't have a great manager, you can't have a great team, you can't even have a great support or admin team, but ultimately, push comes to shove, you're going to be measured on your own success. You have to get yourself to the top of Mount Everest. You have to make the calls in sales. You have to do the visits. You have to do the closing. You have to take responsibility. Number 2, if you don't have the right mindset, not only will you not summit Mount Everest, but the chances are you won't survive summiting Mount Everest, which is a real shame because obviously your family are going to miss you. Number 3, you are going to fail as part of the process. Now, I know this is a cliche to talk about. So long as you learn from your failures, you're going to succeed from your failures as well. But mountaineering absolutely is part of that. I'll share some insight into Miss Levine as well in terms of what her view was on failure, so to speak. And then number 4, you're going to have constant pressure. Now, obviously, as you summit Mount Everest, in many parts of even going through the Khumbu icefall at the base camp to Camp 1, typically there's high risk around that. You're going to have failure, you're going to have some challenges, but also you're going to have pressure constantly. Sales is exactly the same. Whether you're leading the sales team or you are running yourself in sales, you're going to have a lot of pressure on an ongoing basis. Not just internal pressure to succeed and achieve sales targets, not just internal pressure to make KPIs be achieved and do meeting numbers you need to, but of course externally. Now, in their case, it's the elements and the heights and everything else. But from your perspective, there's the competition and even the competitor themselves, suddenly starting to pick up and maybe poach members of your sales team, but also the client themselves. If a client chooses not to work with you, that's a huge headwind to go against, because now you've got to convince them to make a change before you get to convince to make the change with you. And then finally, of course, to land a large client or a large project, one of those breakthrough moments, takes a huge amount of strategizing and planning and precision and execution and follow-up. And when you start to break it down, you realize there are a lot of similarities in leading a sales team or leading yourself within sales, as well as summiting a major peak. Now, Alison Levine, world-class mountaineer and polar explorer. She has conquered all 7 continents' highest peaks, as well as going to the North and South Pole. So people in the modern era of exploration deem it to be, almost the holy grail, if you like. The chance of you managing to do that and stay alive from all of those events is absolutely phenomenal. Now, again, from her story perspective, you picture yourself at the top of Mount Everest. So imagine many, many years or decades of practice to get to this particular moment. And you're trying to go to the top of Mount Everest. Typically, it costs you 50, 75, 100,000 US dollars to pay, so it's not cheap. Yes, you might have had some sponsorship around that, but a huge amount of effort. And there you are at the 8,000 meter mark, which is above which you typically have to sleep your prior night to summiting Mount Everest. What happens is obviously your eyes start to freeze over when you are at the top of Mount Everest. It's normally 3 breaths on oxygen per step. I mean, stop and think about that. For the strain on your body's in that death zone, your brain started to shut down, your risk of a number of different issues with your body and with your brain itself. And then you've got to make that decision of, do I push on the summit and get back down? Because you've got to get down below that 8,000 meter death zone, if you like, or do you accept defeat and climb down? And the first time that she did this, she was only 100 meters short. And you just think about that. That's like you leading a sales team, trying to win the biggest $10 million customer, and then just failing at the last presentation. They say something along the lines of, hey, you know what? We're going to stick with our status quo. We're going to stick with our current supplier, despite the fact that you've spent 6 months or 6 years with them saying, you know what? I'm not happy with my current supplier. And you just can't be bothered. Recently, we won a client who actually measured us against somebody else, with 10 or 12 different criteria. That's like the thoroughness that you have to go through to win a large account. And thankfully, we won them, but sometimes you're going to lose them, and you've got to have the right attitude. As she says, it's not just about summiting. A lot of people who don't climb think it's just about standing on the top of the world for a moment. People often talk about that. You literally are on the top of the world, so to speak, because again, the only way she managed to succeed is because in 2010 she failed to achieve it. So it's about learning from one thing and then achieving it the second time around. It's about coaching your team to realize that, what could we control? What could we influence? Could we do the right thing? And are we prepared to climb again? Now, some people, because of financial restrictions and also age, they don't go back the following year. They typically wait a few years. They sadly miss out on the opportunity of a lifetime. Okay, so it's really important to realize you're going to have to develop that resilience in yourself or in your team, because sometimes you're going to stretch for the top of the mountain and you can't achieve it like she did. Equally, you sometimes need to step back. As you said, if someone were to magically drop you off the summit of Mount Everest, you'd be dead in a matter of minutes because of the altitude gain. You have to actually climb, Camp 3, go back to Camp 1 or 2, then climb to Camp 4, go back to 1 or 2, and then go for the summit. The reality is that takes huge amount of body conditioning, even for fit mountaineers, fit athletes to do that. So let's stop and think about it. If you or your team were to land your biggest ever customer, who's worth 3 times the turnover of all of your current customers, the chances are you'd be dead and buried. You'd kill your brand. Your ops team probably couldn't cope. Your finance team couldn't cope. Your cash flow and stock levels probably couldn't cope. It's no different to climbing Mount Everest. We sometimes have to build ourselves up. We've got to achieve each one as a mission. So think about where your business is going to be in 5 years' time, not, hey, I want to achieve it in the next 5 weeks, because you could break yourself or break your team itself. Now, side note, often when I'm talking and doing personality profiling with operations teams, for example, there's often pushback against sales. They don't want us to run too fast. They are worried about their default numbers, delivering on time and in full every single time. So again, I often have to coach the sales team to say to them, your job is to stretch the operations team, but not to break them. If you're dropped at the top of Mount Everest, that will break you. If you suddenly go from 0 to hero in the space of overnight or 5 weeks, even 5 months, maybe the ops team can't continue to deliver on your promises, so that's a problem. It's really worth keeping in mind, please. Likewise, we've got to understand clearly that sometimes in the world of mountaineering, you have to go back to go forward. And cliched though it is fact. You won't survive Mount Everest if you don't acclimatize, which means going harder than before, settling back down. I often see sales managers, business owners talking about every year we've got to achieve 20% growth every year. I'm sorry, it's unrealistic. Now, some years you should be able to achieve 50% growth, but the next year maybe only 5% growth, either because of your competitors, because of market headwinds, because your customers aren't buying or building as much or doing as many projects. So it's unlikely going to be 20, 20, 20, 20, 20. In fact, I've yet to meet any business of the 15,000 businesses we coach that buy rate is 10% every year or 20% every year. There'll be some years that are greater than that, which involves a huge stretch by your finance and admin and ops team and your sales team. And then things stagnate a bit. Maybe it's only 5% loss, 5% gain, 10% gain. It's not 20, 20, 20. Likewise, don't limit yourself. If you're going to reach for the stars, if you want your sales team to stand on top of the world or whatever your world is, it could be your region, your province, your state, your county, whatever your world is. If you want to be at the top of your world, then you need to be prepared to stick your neck out. You need to be prepared to do those extra 1 call a day. When people say to me, what do you want me to do to grow my sales team long term? It's like, just have them do 1 more call a day, provided those calls are converting into meetings if you're selling business to business or if you're selling something that's quite technologically complex. Typically, you want to do 1 extra call per person per day for the rest of their lives. And if you did that, you'd be successful. It's really, really important to keep that in mind. Now, a lot of people, sadly, the really sad stories of people dying when trying to come off Mount Everest, some of those stories come back to a bit around pride and ego. Now, we talk about pride comes before you fall. It's really important. And of course, in that case, it could be literally, although sadly, some people just can't move any further and they just sit and they freeze to death on the side of Mount Everest, which is incredibly sad for everyone connected to that person. But the reality here is sometimes people fear failure. Some people have pushed on. There was a very sad story 20 years ago of someone who pushed on because he said, look, I've tried once and failed. This is my second go. I knew I couldn't afford it third go. And then he died on his way back down again, but told that story to somebody up there. The reality here is obviously in the world of sales, in the world of business, it's the brutal reality. We win or we lose. We win the client or the project or we lose the client or the project. It's a really brutal environment. So let's just bring it back to the basics. And as I said at the start, I want you to take action either for yourself or for your team from today. Firstly, you need to rely on a support team. You need to rely on a plan and a strategy and the right tactics to achieve that. That involves things like having a set sales process for outbound calling to new customers, having a set account management process that is proactive and stuck to, having a set inbound process, having a set process for running sales meetings. You've got to have the right process, but you've got to execute this process. I don't pie in the sky, this is my theory, this is the best practice. You've got to execute it. You have to climb the Mount Everest. You can't just pay for somebody with the right strategy, which is to take a helicopter to the top of Mount Everest. For starters, 99% of helicopters cannot drop you at the top of Mount Everest because the air is too thin to provide enough upward pressure to keep a helicopter there at height. It's a major issue. So again, technology tells you shouldn't be able to get up there because we can't even manufacture something to get up there 99% of the time. But you are going to need a team with you. You want to be the favored salesperson within your sales team, where the admin team want to support you. You've got to have better planning, better process, but you've got to deliver, as I said before. You do need a huge amount of persistence. In many people's cases, they don't even get to the final Camp 4 before they push on to the summit. They never make it, despite the fact they might have spent 10 or 20 years envisioning getting to that. It isn't enough to have the mental resilience or the mental vision of getting to the top of Mount Everest. It is so much more than that. And at the same time, in the world of Mount Everest, any day you get off a big mountain peak or get away from the South Pole or North Pole safely is a good day. If you're alive, you're breathing, you're moving, you are very, very blessed indeed. You get the opportunity to live and fight another day. Now, if you want to understand how your personality adapts to your ambition and your drive, as well as your decision-making and communication skills, then what we've got there is a discounted link for you to pay for a behavioral profile. Most people refer to those somewhat incorrectly as a personality profile. A behavioral profile is more accurate because it's indicative of likely behavior. The tool we use comes out of Finland called Extended Disc, where it differentiates between your conscious profile and your unconscious profile. Sadly, in 25 to 30% of the time, those are different. It's important you understand that difference. And a lot of online tools that are free only look at your conscious profile, which isn't nearly as important as your unconscious or natural style. Today's topic also comes from some of our sales manager content, as well as our sales academy. If you want help going into 2024, 2025, 2026 to be successful in the world of sales, then send us an email to admin@salesmasterycompany.com or simply click on the link to book in for a free strategy call. Let's have a chat on the phone or via Zoom. Let's see what we can do to help you and drive your business forward. I've been Ambrose Blowfield. We're the Sales Mastery Company. And as always, be sure to take action.